Welcome to the Stress Free Dentist Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Block. As always, I want to inspire, entertain, and educate you on the best tools and technologies out there. My goal is to help make your practice and career more profitable, efficient, and most importantly, more enjoyable. And check out all of my nonfiction and children's books on Amazon, and check out the stressfreedentist.com for any upcoming events. And if you're feeling you're a dental professional that's burnt out, or you just feel stuck or want to get to that next level, visit the International Academy of Dental Life Coaches or www.iadlc.com, and we'll get you matched up with a life coach that understands dentistry. I also wanted to thank our amazing sponsor, Equa Marketing. They have helped me and my practice over the years to improve with SEO and website performance. And to find out how you can make your practice dominate in your area, go to www.equa.com/MSMSFD to book your complimentary meeting. Again, that's www.ekwa.com/MSMSFD. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. And today I am joined by Kyra Yang, who is a board certified master hypnotherapist. Kyra, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Eric. I'm very happy and excited to be here today. And I love talking about the subconscious mind, so I can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, and personally, Kyra has helped me. We've known each other for a couple of years, and we'll get into all that you do and actually how you help me and how you can similarly help other dental professionals out there. But Kyra, first, can you just give the audience your origin story? How did you first become a master hypnotherapist? How did that start?
Yeah, definitely. So this goes back to 2019, right before the pandemic. And I had taken the first leap from, 9 to 5 corporate job, going into entrepreneurship. It's something I've always wanted. And, the classic story, you put your whole life savings in, you go all in. And then the lockdown in Toronto, which was particularly bad, it ended up being like 17 months. But when it initially happened, I was like, oh no, what did I just do? Did I blow up my life? And, unfortunately at that time, because I had given up everything, I was literally broke and, in debt, building out my first business. It was very scary. And I, at the same time, was listening to these podcast episodes about manifestation. And in my mind, I was like, this is a bunch of BS. This can't be real. But there were so many stories about people finding success in their careers, in their businesses, in love, in their self-confidence. And at the time, I was very insecure, very worried about life, very anxious about, the future of what I had, where I was going and what I had done for myself. And so they had a course and I signed up. And I started doing these quote unquote meditations and started journaling. And prior to this, I'd done zero personal development. I had zero self-awareness. I was just going through life. And I started to feel better. I started to feel more confident. My anxiety started to melt away. I started to find more opportunities. And I ended up meeting up with a friend of mine who was a life coach who eventually let me know that she saw a hypnotherapist like as her therapist. And it was in that moment, I was like, wait a minute, this is a job. And I knew it was like an instant knowing. I don't know if you've ever had that type of moment where it's just like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And so I went and got certified and started my business a few months later, and it just took off from there. But that's how it started. But I went from total skeptic because I didn't even know what hypnosis was, these meditations, right? That ended up being hypnosis, to then becoming a hypnotherapist.
Would you say that that is part of success with the client? Is the client coming in with an open mind and not coming in with this major pessimistic view of hypnotherapy?
100%. I mean, Hollywood definitely did hypnosis dirty. You think about like Office Space, getting like stuck in trance or, clucking like a chicken or, there's these conceptions of blacking out or being brainwashed. But the truth of the matter is that, yes, there is some hypnosis for entertainment, which again, this is not going against anyone's will. These people want to be on stage and want to be seen. But the truth is that with hypnosis, we're it's not magic. It's working with science, and we're working with changing the neuroplasticity of one's mind, which is your brain's amazing ability to adapt and change and to learn. And when we do hypnosis, we're using predominantly theta brainwave states where we can access the subconscious mind, which your subconscious influences 95% of your behavior because it holds your identity, your self-perception, which influences your thoughts, whether they're positive or negative, your emotions, whether you feel confident or you feel depressed or anxious, which then ultimately will impact your energy, your level of clarity to make decisions in your day-to-day. And your decisions and choices all end up making your reality, right? Your decisions in business, your decisions in your health, your decisions in your relationships, right? And so if you are seeing some pattern in your life or some area of your life that you're not loving, there's likely a deeper subconscious program, a limiting belief that is holding you back.
Yeah, I think that's, why I initially reached out to you. I think we're going on, a couple of years ago, was that I just felt like I had a few triggers that were holding me back. I felt like I needed to clear some garbage out of my head,
Yes.
and I just needed to rid myself of these, last remaining things that I just kept focusing on. And in doing that, I knew that if I could do that, I would open up my brain to just be more productive, whether it's with my dental office or my other businesses. Can you talk a little bit about that? And you can even talk about me personally about, first meeting me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Eric, you are definitely a high achiever, right? Like you are a dental professional that takes a lot of schooling. You've been writing books and you fall into a very similar category as most of my clients who are high achieving, many who are millionaires. And, it takes a certain level of grit and a certain level of performance to become ultra successful. And, there is a caveat to this because many high performers have something what I call high performer trauma. And, everyone's like trauma, like, you're thinking like actual like physical abuse, but trauma is just any sort of limitation that was placed on you that creates any sort of symptomology, predominantly for my clientele, is burnout. Right? Burnout, stress, anxiety, procrastination, those are all symptoms of the high performer trauma. And why this occurs is when we are children, there is a variety of reasons. There could be, parents that were always working and were never around, or parents that went through a divorce, or there was like, really competitive environment with your siblings, always being compared. You could have been bullied. There could have been actually physical or emotional or mental abuse, right? There's many reasons. But as children, our survival depends on the love and the acceptance and the safety of those around us, right? Our parents, our caretakers. So if we feel as though we are not going to get it, right, for some reason, if they are absent or there is some abuse or there is some competitive nature that makes us feel less than, we start to learn that the love and the safety that we seek to like literally survive as children, we don't know anything else. It's not stable. Right. And so then we have to go out and get it. Right. We have to actually, it's not freely given. We have to actually go out and earn it. Right. And especially for me, and I'm sure some of your listeners will resonate. Like I came from an Asian household where getting straight A's was the only way I got emotional expression and love and celebration. And otherwise it was like, why isn't this an A plus? Like there was more criticism involved, right? And as children, we start to fear that. So we are like, okay, now because we have to go out and get it, we learn to excel. Right. And we go get straight A's, we go to Ivy League schools, we become doctors and lawyers, and all the things that we're told are deemed as successful. And we start to build this persona of self that projects this perfect image, right, of success, of the material things, of what we do for others. And we start to learn that our value is not in who we are, but in what we do and have. Right. And this is where the discrepancy happens. And the gap of why people feel so unfulfilled, so miserable, so stressed, even though in theory they have like kind of the perfect life, like you have the financial freedom to a degree, you have, the happy family, you have it all, but you still feel like You have to chase more because, again, it's a survival mechanism. This is the survival mindset where we have to keep chasing more because we've been trained and programmed for extrinsic motivation, right? Because we're actually looking for, so when we start to the incessant strategizing or the chronic overthinking or like the analysis paralysis, or we don't make decisions or we're like constantly worrying about like what our patients are thinking or what, our coordinators are thinking or the shareholders or whoever it is. These are all your subconscious trying to seek control, right? Like when we have a lens of perfectionism for everything in our lives, we're trying to seek control because we don't feel safe, right? So we're trying to find it in outside sources like we learned as children, but you're not a child anymore, right? But your brain is firing off signal, danger, we're not safe, as if you were that child. And so that's why it starts to put you into these survival states, which, as you mentioned, Eric, it closes off the states for peak performance, right? And this is a big thing that I work with my clients on because you only have 128 bits that you are processing of information every second. We're getting inundated with like millions. And so you're going to pick up based on what your self-perception, your beliefs, your values, your conditioning based on religion, based on the relationships you saw modeled to you, based on the money stories that were told to you. That's all you're going to pick up, right? And if most of that is dealt with trying to not get hurt, right? The reason why we have this mentality, the high performer trauma, is because we don't want to fail and we don't ultimately want to be rejected and abandoned, right? Because again, that is threatening the safety. And so when most of our time is spent on incessant strategizing, chronic overthinking, the constant anxiety of what others are thinking, like all of that, it eats up all this like really precious, expensive neurochemistry that could be used for productivity, focus, motivation, creativity, passion, drive, like all the things that intrinsically, which we want is the shift, right? That's where we want to reprogram to from extrinsic fear-based motivation to intrinsic motivation. Because think about like, if you've ever had something where you like really wanted something and you just like have so much energy, like so excited, like can't wait to go after it because you're driven by an internal deep desire, right? And that is pulling you towards something, right? You're not running away. You're actually being pulled towards, gravitationally pulled towards something you really, really want, right? And that actually gives you energy. Whereas the hypervigilance that is unfortunately an overdrive causes an energy drain, which is why too many people feel burnt out, miserable, exhausted by the day-to-day at their business, in their relationships, and so on.
Yeah, I think a lot of dentists can relate to what you've said. We have this path, we study hard, we work hard, we take all the science classes, we try to do well on our aptitude tests, we get into school, then while we're in school, we just work hard and study, and then we pass our national and state dental boards. But then we get out into the real world and we taste failure for the first time, where something didn't go right or we got a bad review. And then we just end up beating ourselves up. It creates this fear mindset where we fear the worst. This happened to me personally. I would always think of like worst case scenario situations, and I would just focus on it. And I would focus on, the one negative thing that happened during the day. And ultimately that just ate up at me and really did lead to, me going through burnout.
It's very common. And, the funny thing that I like to remind people is that 85% of the things that you worry about never happen. And we're so designed to think about catastrophically the worst case scenarios because our response, our natural response to want to protect ourselves. Again, this is a protective mechanism. Whenever you have anxiety or stress or overthinking or procrastination, you're actually trying to protect yourself from the pain of failure. And, this is why another difficulty, and I know we've spoken about this in the dental industry, is that, you trained to become a dentist. You didn't train to become a business owner. Mm-hmm. And, that those are two very different jobs. And the big thing with a lot of schooling, especially something that is so intensive, such as dental schooling, is that there's a lot of testing and a lot of kind of small feedback loops or bigger feedback loops that validate you, like, yes, you're good, or no, you're not, right? It's such a kind of like a black and white system in some ways. And there is a level of certainty that one gets trained, especially as high performers, certainty to get validated by the external, right? Like, that confirms that I am good enough, or I am worthy of this success, or this money, or this job, or this house, or whatever it is. And if we don't get it, then we suddenly, again, beat ourselves up. Oh, we're not worthy, right? Or this worst case scenario happened. Oh, I'm a terrible person, which then again eats away at us, and we get mentally burnt out. And so the big thing to understand is that one of the things where, if we want to have peace in our lives, where we want to step away from that burnout, it's understanding our ability to tolerate uncertainty. Right? This is one of the biggest things just across the board with entrepreneurs. They really struggle with uncertainty because we're conditioned for a world of like, go to what's certain, right? But if we want, next levels of success and something new in our lives, we have to move towards what is uncertain because we don't have it yet, right? But the brain craves familiarity. And so really understanding like uncertainty, when we think about like the worst case scenario, we should give as much credit to like the best case scenario, because who knows which will happen. It's just as equally likely to happen. And we never know how things are going to happen. So why not train our minds to start thinking about the best case scenario? And this is one of the biggest things with hypnosis. When you train your mind outside of survival or out of survival, your brain has the opportunity for a choice of what is the best case scenario, seeing things in a more positive light, which again give us energy to go ahead and actually execute in a more emotionally intelligent way, in a way that provides greater levels of leadership because you are thinking more clearly and you're not just like reacting to the environment. And you have a greater level of clarity as well, right? So these intangible resources psychologically help entrepreneurs and high performers perform and succeed in the long run. Because if we're constantly beating ourselves up, it's very hard to recover. And so understanding, again, the uncertainty has been conditioned as bad, as fearful, is really about also understanding. It's less about that, and it's more about understanding that it's actually about like possibility, right? Anything that we want can only happen on the other side of the action we probably don't want to take because we don't know how it will turn out. But it's actually the only avenue that will allow you to create that possibility. And if you fail, it's just feedback, right? There's no such thing as failure. It's just feedback that tells you that worked or it didn't. How do I improve? And it's your next step. And that's the other thing too, where it's, thinking that like where our brain tends to go in catastrophe is that like, that's the end of the road. And it's like, well, even if that were to happen, okay, what is the next step? There's always going to be a next step. And that's what we have to constantly remind ourselves.
Can you talk about the process of tapping into someone's subconscious? I know with me, basically we did it just like this. It was through Zoom. I was sitting in my comfy chair here. I was aware and, not asleep. In fact, I even one time I could hear my kids outside playing and horsing around. Can you tell me about that whole process and how you actually can tap into someone's subconscious? And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you and I focused on.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of things that happen. Some of the things that we did also included NLP and timeline therapy. So there were a few modalities that we used together. But essentially, the idea is the reason why hypnosis works is, versus like something like traditional therapy, right? Is that traditional therapy focuses on like why you have the problem. And so many people that I work with come to me and they could be the therapist themselves. They understand inside out exactly the problem, why they have it, where it came from. And what's more important is that in hypnosis and in NLP and working with the subconscious, we're looking at how you hold the problem in your mind, because it's less about the content of what happened to you when you were two, but more about how that has now created scaffolding of the structure of how you're holding the problem. Because every problem we have in our lives is self-created. Like, we're thinking it's a problem. Like, for example, it's a little bit of a tangent, but something like a phobia, it's a very strong one-time learning, right? And when we think about like a spider in our brains, we're thinking about like a spider jumping at our face, which is why when we see it, we scream, right? But like, no spider is jumping at, they're just sitting on the corner spinning its web, right? But we have these strategies and learnings that we build. We have strategies for motivation, for anxiety, for focus, for, how we buy things, even sex, right? We have strategies for how we do everything. And so when we can understand your strategy of how you learned, because it's a learned behavior to protect yourself, how you're doing the problem, then we can change it. And so when it comes to accessing the subconscious mind, we have our conscious mind, which is like the 5% of our rational, critical thinking mind. And then we have our subconscious, which is the 95%, which houses our beliefs and our emotions and, influences our behavior very heavily. And so one of the most important things is isolating the root cause, right? And I know we of course did that together. But a lot of the time, what people don't understand is that like your anxiety is not about anxiety, or your stress is not about stress. It's a response to something deeper. So usually it's some sort of limiting belief around not being good enough, not being worthy, not being capable, not being smart enough, your fear of looking stupid, fear of failing. And that causes you to then think negative thoughts, right? Which is how the symptoms of anxiety, which then also lead to burnout, right? Because when you're thinking those negative thoughts constantly, you feel unmotivated, then you're beating yourself up for being unproductive. And then you're in this like terrible vicious cycle. And so when we can isolate the root cause, right? The thing that's triggering that whole flurry of thoughts and emotions, and ultimately your lack of behavior or the bad habit that you want to kick, there's nothing to fire off, right? So that's one of the biggest things where we go in, we isolate the root cause of what is causing the anxiety, stress, worry, overthinking, or the low confidence. And once we remove that, which is by a couple of ways, right? We're either going to be visualizing new experiences, we're going to be gathering learnings, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and new perspectives, essentially. And we're unlinking the old negative emotion, right? Because when we're thinking about anxiety now, about something that's going to happen tomorrow, it's because we're remembering something old where it used to happen to us, right? We learned that that's how we should feel. So when we can unlink the negative emotion, and when we can remove the old limiting belief that is causing you to then have these symptoms, then you get the solution, right? Then we have grounds for a new possibility for new behavior change, which is really what we're looking for, rapid behavior change. But most people can't change their behavior because they're caught in the negative feelings, which then it's essentially self-sabotage. So that's one thing. The other thing on like a more scientific level is that when we are in hypnosis, we use a couple of techniques that get you, progressive relaxation. It just feels like meditation. You're not going to feel weird or hypnotized. And when we get to a point where we're accessing the theta brainwave states, because there is a barrier between the conscious and subconscious mind that starts to relax. And as soon as we're in that theta brainwave state, your brain is more receptive to accepting new positive suggestions. Again, I can't tell you to do anything or accept anything you don't want. It's always going to be in alignment with what you already want. And when we visualize in this state as well, your brain doesn't know the difference between what is real and imagined in some cases. And so when we can reprogram a very, very positive experience where you weren't rejected or you weren't shamed or you weren't embarrassed, and instead it was very empowering, it was very like, you felt really confident, you saw yourself in the best light, your brain is going to start to create new associations that are positive, which again will not trigger the old association, right? It's all about breaking old associations and things that we learned that were incorrect that is now causing current levels of self-sabotage.
Yeah. And I remember we went back and I think you said that earlier in life that you can remember, for example, the first time I felt embarrassed, or the first time I felt angry or fear. The earlier in life, the better, before, age 9 or, even
Yeah, age
4.
7.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then we really tapped into those, first, or what my subconscious thought were the first times. Um, and we really started focusing on those, and then, hovering above it and kind of looking down.
Yes.
And then you even gave me some homework after with some recordings to play for myself, which you can play, while going, trying right before bed while you're going to sleep. That kind of helped with the subconscious as well.
Definitely. And, a big thing is all we're doing is changing old negative associations to new positive ones. And as soon as we feel positive or we're not getting triggered, for example, silly example, you see the dishes on the sink and normally you go and like say something snippy to your wife, right? Not you, but like, just an example, right? And what if in that moment, that, seeing the dishes to you could have felt like, oh, she doesn't care about me, so I must be unworthy. Okay. And again, this is going down a deep rabbit hole. That's kind of the deepest connection that you can get to, which is why then you lash out. But say, for example, we got rid of the unworthiness and the association that means that she doesn't care about you and you see the dishes, then you're able to respond for not in snippy attitude or like a defensiveness. You are able to have a new opportunity to have a different type of conversation with a new level of emotional intelligence. And it's all in these nuances that these small behavior changes change the dynamic of the relationships you have, change the dynamic of if you feel imposter syndrome or not, and put yourself out there for new opportunities. Change your experience of, being somewhere where you're not caught in your head wondering if you said something stupid or, do they like you? And instead just being present to the life that you have worked so hard to build to actually enjoy it, right? This changes how you get to experience life. And one of the things that, I mentioned about getting the learnings is that when you think about anything that's happened to you in the past, you think, okay, like, I think about this negative time and, that person like, oh, like, how did they betray me? And how could they do this to me? So anytime we still feel negative emotions about a previous event, it means that we didn't get the learnings about taking care of ourselves or keeping ourselves safe, right? So our subconscious is trying to hold on to that experience because it's like, hey, like, we got really betrayed and you got super hurt and we can't forget about that because it's going to happen to us again. So like, we got to hold on. But the reality is that all you're holding on to is a negative emotion that's just draining you, right? And we might close ourselves off, especially when there's been betrayal by a business partner or a loved one or someone close to us. We close ourselves up to future opportunities for business, for closeness, for intimacy, because we're still holding and harboring fear about getting hurt. And so when we can get learnings, right, you'll know you'll got learnings because when you think about an old event, it no longer harbors negative emotions. We get the valuable learning that our subconscious wants about taking care of ourselves, about speaking up, about walking away, about setting boundaries, about whatever it is that you needed to know that in future you can protect yourself. And again, that frees up more energy so that your life experience, you can access more flow, you can access more productivity, more success, better relationships. There's just more room for you to actually like live life by your terms and on your terms. So it's a really important thing to let go of the quote unquote past, subconsciously and consciously.
That's great. Now let's wrap up, Kyra, with two final questions. Number one is, how do we get a hold of you or find out more about what you're up to? And then number two, what advice would you give to the young dentists or young entrepreneurs out there?
Yes. So you can find me at generatemindsetcurrency.com. So that's generatemindsetcurrency.com. And that has, my website, more about me and more about my program. And then also, if you're on Twitter, that is predominantly where I like to hang out. So that's at I am Kyra Yang. So I am KYRAYANG. And I love to write content all about productivity, mindset, subconscious performance, entrepreneurship, all that good stuff. So if you're on Twitter, come say hello. I'd love to meet you. And yeah, the one piece of advice is the big thing in life is to stop chasing life and to start living in it, right? You work so hard for too long to constantly, it's kind of like a desert mirage where you think that next milestone, that next, that car or that house or private jet or, that next like income, whatever it is for you is going to bring you the happiness that you're seeking. And it's not, right? Because again, that old trauma, the high performer trauma is going to keep you from ever feeling it, because what you're actually looking for is internal safety, and to feel that's where the happiness and the fulfillment really lies, right? So start looking at where in your life are you holding mostly extrinsic motivation, right? The approval from your friends, family, wife, lovers, whatever, friends. Or if you feel that, what you have or what you do for others is more important, take a look at that and take inventory of that. And then start to look at the ways that you can promote more intrinsic motivation. What do you like to do? Where do you want to say yes? Where do you want to say no? And start really connecting with yourself, understanding, you can shine brightly and be seen and still be accepted. You can say no and still be loved. You can, go out there and, take a risk and know that, the truth is, I'll say this, to build confidence, you have to act in the face of doubt. If you want to build peace of mind in life and peace in life, you have to learn to tolerate uncertainty. And if you want to be successful, you have to accept the inevitability of loss along the way. That's it.
Great stuff. Kyra Yang, thank you so much for joining us. Such a great episode.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you having me here.
Thanks again for listening to the Stress Free Dentist podcast. And don't hesitate to get in touch with me at info@thestressfreedentist.com. And if you haven't already, please subscribe on your favorite platform and leave us a review. Until the next episode, I'm Dr. Eric Block, the Stress Free Dentist.